June 18th, 1944. Camp Huntsville, Texas. The heat hit first, sharp, crushing, alive. When the truck doors swung open, it felt like someone poured the sun straight onto our faces. 29 of us sat frozen on the wooden benches, sweat sticking cloth to skin, breath caught halfway in our throats. Then we saw them. A row of American soldiers stood waiting in the glare, silent, still, enormous, and black. The air inside the truck turned electric. No one spoke. No one breathed. Their helmets gleamed. Their uniforms looked untouched by hunger, untouched by war, pressed, clean, impossibly bright under the white Texas sky. Their boots were polished so sharply they reflected the dust we hadn't even stepped into yet. They were taller than any men I had ever seen in my life. Broader, stronger, fed. Frida's fingers dug into my arm. God, they're giants, she whispered. A single soldier stepped forward. The boards beneath our feet creaked. He lifted his helmet, sweat shining on his brow, and said in a calm, steady voice, "Ladies, welcome to Huntsville." My heart stumbled. Ladies, welcome. The words did not belong together. Not here, not from a man we were told would despise us. We climbed down one by one. The metal step burned under my boot sole. The dust rose in a warm, choking cloud that tasted like clay and sun-baked wood. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. Up close, the soldiers looked even larger. Their shadows stretched across us like a second set of bars. I kept my gaze low, but I could smell them. Soap, sweat, gun oil, something warm and earthly. They didn't smell like fear. They didn't smell like cruelty. They smelled like work, like strength, like a country that wasn't starving. A breeze stirred, hot, but a relief. It carried something unexpected. Bread, real bread, fresh, yeast warm. My stomach clenched with a sharp, humiliating ache. At home, the last loaf I touched crumbled like dust. The soldier nearest me shifted slightly, just enough to create space as I stepped forward. Not pushing, not crowding, just aware, watching. His eyes were dark, steady, unreadable. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a man doing a job. We were led through the gates. Gravel crunched under our boots, steady, soft, rhythmic. A jeep rattled past. 2 white soldiers laughed at something on the radio. From somewhere behind a storage shed, a woman's voice floated up, singing, clear and strong. It sounded like something from a gramophone. Proud, bright, American. This place felt impossibly alive. Arsenal of democracy. I had heard the phrase whispered among officers, but now I could feel it. In the heat, in the humming of engines, in the scent of fuel and grain, in the casual abundance of a nation untouched by ruin. And behind us, the line of black soldiers followed. Silent, measured, watching. Their presence made the world feel tight around my ribs. Not because they moved aggressively. Quite the opposite. Their calmness, their control, made every warning we'd been fed in Germany feel suddenly childish, thin, ridiculous. Yet fear clung to me like my damp uniform. At the registration tent, I sat across from a clerk who barely glanced up. His pencil scratched across paper. Quick, neat, indifferent. My hands trembled as I signed. When I stood to leave, the same black soldier who'd greeted us earlier tipped his chin politely. "Ma'am." Just that, quiet, simple. A word I did not deserve, did not expect, did not understand. As I walked toward the barracks, the heat seemed to soften. My breath finally released in a long, shaky stream. Behind me, the soldiers dispersed, boots thudding in a slow, even rhythm, fading into the sprawl of the camp. I stared at the dust drifting behind them and felt something unsettling curl deep inside my chest. If these men I had been raised to fear, could look at us without hatred, then what else had we been wrong about? I didn't have the words yet, just a sensation, a thin crack forming in the beliefs I'd carried across an ocean, a crack that would only widen from here. Fear did not arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, like heat through a tin roof, quiet, suffocating, impossible to escape. And the strangest part? The men we feared most were the only ones who had shown us politeness. That contradiction gnawed at me from the moment I stepped off the truck. The first night in Camp Huntsville felt heavier than any night I'd lived through during the war. Heavier than bomb shelters, heavier than ration lines, heavier than the moment my unit was surrounded outside Caen. Because at least in France, I knew what to expect. Here, I knew nothing. Nothing except the warnings we'd been fed since the age of 10. They will hurt you. They will take revenge. They are animals in uniform. They hate German women most of all. Our commanding officers had repeated these lines until they became truth carved into bone. Now, those animals were the quiet figures patrolling outside our barracks, moving with slow, even steps, their silhouettes long and steady in the Texas moonlight. Black soldiers. Tall, strong, impossible to read, and we were terrified. Inside the barracks, the air was thick with whispers. Do you think they'll come inside at night? They outnumber us. What if the guards switch, and it's only them? Someone started crying softly into her blanket. Then another. The beds smelled faintly of detergent, cleaner than anything I'd slept on in years, and even that made me nervous. Nothing in war was ever this clean. Nothing in captivity ever felt this organized. The door clanged shut behind the last of us, and the lock slid into place with a metallic snap. The sound sliced straight through my spine. Outside, boots passed by. Slow, measured, heavy enough to shake dust from the rafters. The steps of the black soldiers were different from the white. Guards, lower, more grounded, a rhythm I couldn't ignore. Every time they stopped near the door, my breath froze in my chest. Hush. Listen, Greta whispered. We all held still. The soft hum of crickets filled the silence, then the scrape of boots turning. They moved on. We exhaled all at once, a trembling wave. Morning did nothing to ease the tension. The sun rose fast in Texas, sharp and merciless. It painted long shadows across the yard, shadows that seemed to stretch from the guards right up to the doorway. When we stepped outside for roll call, the heat wrapped around us like a hand tightening on our throats. And there they were again. The black soldiers. Watching, quiet, expressionless. 1,000 thoughts I tried to bury clawed their way back up. If they hate us, today will be the day. If they want revenge, all they have to do is wait until we're out of sight. If they are as dangerous as we were told. I didn't dare finish the thought. The officer in charge began calling numbers, but I barely heard him. My eyes kept drifting to the soldiers standing at the edges of the yard. Their uniforms fit differently, tighter around their shoulders, sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. In Germany, propaganda posters always portrayed black men with exaggerated features, monstrous proportions, dripping with violence. But the men before me were precise, disciplined, almost statuesque. That only made it worse. Human cruelty I understood. Human discipline in those I feared, that was far more unnerving. When they escorted us to the work area, I felt the sting of another contradiction. They kept space between us. Too much space for a predator. They avoided touching us unless absolutely necessary. They spoke less than the white guards, but when they did, their tone was neutral, calm, almost gentle, and still, fear pressed against my ribs like a fist. One of them, broad-shouldered, tall enough to cast a shadow that swallowed my own, walked beside our group as we carried buckets of laundry to the wash station. At one point, my bucket sloshed and nearly tipped from my hands. My grip slipped. His hand shot forward, quick, controlled, catching the bucket before it spilled. I flinched as if struck. He froze instantly, raising both hands in the air as though approaching a frightened animal. Easy, he said softly. His voice was so deep it felt like the ground vibrated beneath my boots. I'm just helping. That's all. That's all. I nodded stiffly, gripping the bucket until my fingers hurt. He waited a second longer, then stepped back. far back, leaving a cautious distance between us. I didn't understand the gesture then. I would later. Fear twisted into something stranger during mealtime. The metal kitchen containers arrived steaming, carried by 2 black soldiers and 1 white corporal. The lids clanged open. Warm bread, beans, a smell that made my stomach growl involuntarily. One of the black soldiers noticed. Just a flicker of his eyes, nothing more. He reached for an extra slice of bread. Stopped. Glanced at the corporal. The corporal nodded. He placed it on the corner of my tray. My throat tightened painfully. I couldn't decide whether to thank him or drop the tray and run. Every instinct screamed trap. Every memory insisted danger. But the smell, rich, warm, baked that very morning, clouded my thoughts. Behind me, Elsa whispered, "Don't eat it. They want to weaken us." Yet another voice murmured, "Or feed us." I didn't know which frightened me more. Later that afternoon, while working near the water barrels, I caught a strange scent that made me falter. Soap. Real soap. Clean and sharp, mixed with a faint hint of shaving cream. One of the blackguards was filling canteens nearby. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his posture straight and tired in the way of men who'd worked long before the war began. A thin line of lather clung to the edge of his jaw. He must have shaved minutes earlier. In Germany, soap was rationed so heavily that a single bar lasted months. Here, the air smelled clean. His eyes flicked to me briefly, not harsh, just aware. Then he returned to the canteens. The simple humanity of the moment, the ordinary act of shaving, the scent of soap, the care with which he handled the water, unsettled me deeply. We had been told these men were primitive, yet everything about him, his grooming, his discipline, his quiet focus, contradicted that image violently. The ground beneath my beliefs began to shift. That night, the fear changed shape. It wasn't the terror of brutality anymore. It was the terror of not understanding. Because the more I watched them, the clearer it became. They were not behaving like enemies who wanted revenge. They were behaving like soldiers doing their duty, with restraint, with dignity, with humanity. And that terrified me more than any threat. What kind of world had we stepped into where the men we feared most carried water instead of weapons? Where those labeled inferior stood taller, stronger, calmer than anyone I had ever known? Where the soldiers who had every reason to hate us didn't show an ounce of it? Long after lights out, I lay awake staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the steady footsteps of the black guards pacing outside. Thud, thud, thud. A rhythm steady as a heartbeat. A rhythm that made me question everything I'd carried across an ocean. Fear had changed. It was no longer fear of them. It was fear of the truth. If our leaders had lied about these men, what else had they lied about? The question kept me awake until dawn. I used to believe kindness was dangerous. That was what Germany taught us. Kindness made you weak, soft, unprepared, and kindness from an enemy. That was impossible. A trap. A lie. But the first act of kindness at Camp Huntsville did not come like a trick. It came fast, undeniable, and so human that it cracked something deep inside me. It began on the third morning. The sun had barely risen, but the heat was already climbing. A heavy, throbbing heat that pressed against the skull and made the world shimmer. We were assigned to clear brush along the fence line, a job we were too exhausted, too dehydrated, and too frightened to perform well. I bent down to lift a bundle of dead branches. A sharp pain tore through my calf. My leg seized, twisted, locked. I gasped, the world blurring. The next second, I was on the ground, dust filling my mouth. Around me, the other women froze. No one moved to help. Fear held them like a hand around the throat. In Germany, falling behind meant punishment. In France, weakness meant abandonment. Here, none of us knew the rules well enough to risk stepping out of line. Bootsteps thudded behind me, slow at first, then suddenly fast. I braced myself, but the voice that reached me was not cold, not angry, not triumphant. "Don't move, ma'am." A shadow fell over me. A pair of dark, strong hands appeared in the corner of my vision. The guard knelt in the scorching dust beside me. It was Dwight. We had only seen him from a distance before. A tall black soldier with arms like sculpted stone and a walk that seemed to match the earth's own rhythm. Up close, he felt even larger, broad shoulders blocking out the sun, breath steady as if heat meant nothing to him, but his eyes were gentle. I hated how much that surprised me. "You're cramping bad," he said quietly. "Texas heat will kill you faster than bullets. Easy now." He slid one hand under my calf, lifting it just enough to ease the muscle. The pain shot upward, sharp as a blade. I bit down on my lip. "Breathe," he murmured. His voice was deep, low, calming in a way that felt unnatural coming from someone I'd been taught to fear. "Breathe for me. Good. Again." He worked slowly, carefully, as if I were something fragile. A few meters away, the other soldiers glanced over, but no one yelled. No one mocked. They simply let him work. For a long moment, there was only the sound of cicadas screaming in the heat, the thrum of distant engines, my ragged breaths, and his steady, almost patient touch. When the muscle finally loosened, my body sagged with relief. I hadn't realized I was shaking until his canteen appeared in front of my face. "Drink," he said. Not a request, not an order, a necessity. I stared at it, unable to move. In Germany, water was rationed to the drop. In the POW transports, we'd survived on muddy buckets. Even on the ship to America, water was measured like gold. Here, this man, this black American soldier, was offering it freely. My throat tightened with suspicion. He must have sensed it. Dwight uncapped the canteen, took a small sip, and held it out again. "It's safe," he said softly. My fingers closed around the metal before I realized I'd moved. The water hit my tongue, cold and sharp, a shock so intense it almost felt like a punishment. Then it slid down my throat, cooling something much deeper than the heat. "Slow," Dwight said, touching the air lightly. "Don't make yourself sick." He waited until I finished, then helped me sit up, again preserving distance, again careful not to startle me. For a moment we simply looked at each other. Dust swirled between us like a thin veil. He gave a small nod. "Ma'am," and walked away. Not expecting thanks, not wanting praise. Just moving on to the next task like he hadn't just overturned 15 years of conditioning in less than a minute. That act should have been enough to break me. But it wasn't the last kindness that day. As we returned to work, I noticed things I had been too afraid to see earlier. A guard shielding one of the girls, Sophie, from the sun with his own shadow as she worked. Another passing out extra ladles of water when he thought the white corporal wasn't looking. Another slowing his pace so the older women in our group didn't fall behind. None of it grand, none of it heroic, all of it unmistakably kind. But the moment that struck deepest came during lunch. We gathered near the shade of a wooden shed. 2 large metal containers were rolled toward us. Thick beans, soft bread, something warm I couldn't identify but smelled like comfort. 3 men carried the containers. 2 were white corporals I recognized. The third was a black soldier with sleeves rolled high, sweat glistening along his forearms. He set the container down gently, almost tenderly, then wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. When Sophie reached for her tin plate, she stumbled on the uneven ground. The soldier lunged forward, caught her elbow, steadied her, and stepped back instantly, hands lifted in apology. "Didn't mean to startle you, miss," he said. "Miss." A word I had not heard used kindly in years. Sophie blinked, then nodded, the tiniest, trembling acknowledgement. For a second, the soldier smiled. Not wide, not bold, just a small, quiet lift at the corner of his mouth. Then he turned away. I stared after him, stunned. This was not what we were told to expect. This was not the enemy we were trained to fear. This was something else entirely. By the end of the afternoon, my certainty in the world I'd known began to unravel. Back in Germany, the Geneva Convention existed only on paper. Food was rationed to soldiers before civilians, civilians before prisoners, prisoners before enemy women. Here, in the heart of Texas, we were given more food in a day than some villages in Hamburg saw in a week. Here, we were handed cups of cool water without conditions, bandages if we scraped our hands, shade if we looked faint. America fed us while Germany starved us. America treated us humanely while our own leaders used us as expendable parts. The contrast was so sharp it made me dizzy. But the moment that haunted me most came at dusk. We were being marched back toward the barracks, tired and sore, dust clinging to our ankles. I lagged behind a little, my calf still tender from the cramp. Dwight walked parallel to us, a few paces out, scanning the yard. As I passed him, his eyes flicked to my leg. "You'll be sore tomorrow," he said softly, not turning his head. I swallowed. "Yes." "You drink more tonight, and sit in the shade." A pause. Heat don't care who you fought for. I stopped walking, not because of the pain, because of the words. Heat don't care who you fought for. My breath caught at the truth of it. War didn't care either. Neither did hunger, neither did fear. But he did. Enough to say something. Enough to notice. As the others moved ahead, I realized my heart was beating in a strange, uneven rhythm. Not from fear, not from pain, from something far more dangerous. The first spark of doubt. The beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew. Kindness had found its way past my defenses. And once it entered, nothing felt solid anymore. Not my beliefs, not my pride, not my hatred. It would take days for the cracks to widen, weeks for them to split open. But the first act of kindness, the one given freely without expectation, was enough to change the direction of my life. I didn't know it yet, but I had just begun to trust the enemy. I thought the worst thing an enemy could do was hurt you. I was wrong. The worst thing an enemy could do was be kind enough to break you. By the end of the first week, my fear had shifted into something quieter, heavier. Not safety, not yet, but confusion. The kind that gnaws at the edges of your sleep. I kept replaying Dwight's voice in my mind, the careful way his hands eased my leg, the way he stepped back to give me space. And it unsettled me more than hatred ever had. Because kindness from someone you fear does not soothe you. It shatters you. I didn't know how close I was to breaking until the morning it finally happened. Loud, public, humiliating in a way no guard could have intended. The mess hall smelled like warm bread and something sweet, so sweet it almost hurt to breathe it in. The building was long, wooden, buzzing with the sounds of trays clattering and spoons tapping against tin bowls. The smell alone made my knees feel weak. Back home, Hamburg was starving. Not metaphorically, literally. My mother wrote once that she'd traded her wedding ring for 2 rotten potatoes. My cousin died in a bread riot outside the U-Bahn station. My neighbors boiled wallpaper glue for soup. Here, in the middle of America, the air smelled like a bakery. It was enough to make me dizzy. We lined up in silence. The floorboards creaked beneath our boots. Ahead of me, guards, white and black, moved behind serving counters with the ease of men who'd done this 1,000 times. The black soldier on my line was tall, older than Dwight, with calm eyes and a gentleness in his movements that made my chest ache. He ladled beans onto trays, cut slices of bread, handed out apples so crisp the skin shone under the overhead lights. When my turn came, he paused. Not long, not noticeably, just a flicker of recognition. Then came the moment. He reached for the cornbread pan, cut a square, set it on my tray. Then, without thinking, or perhaps thinking too kindly, he added a second piece of cornbread. It should have been nothing, a gesture so small it meant little to him. But to me, it was everything I had lost, everything I missed, everything I refused to feel. 2 pieces of bread. too. My family hadn't seen bread like that in 3 years. My little brother died with the taste of stale crust in his mouth. My vision blurred. The soldier didn't notice at first. He simply nodded politely. "Next," he called, sliding the tray forward, but my hands were shaking. I couldn't breathe. The warmth from the bread seeped through the tin and into my palms. Soft, buttery, decadent. A luxury, an obscenity, a kindness I did not know how to hold. The tray slipped, tipped, fell. It hit the wooden floor with a sharp, echoing clang. Bread and beans skidded across the planks. The hall went dead silent. Every head turned. Every boot froze. Someone gasped. My knees buckled and I dropped with them. Not on purpose, not from shame. From the sheer, crushing weight of everything I'd been refusing to admit. I didn't just cry. I broke. Sobs tore out of me. Violent, ugly, loud. I hadn't cried like that since I was a child. Not when I was captured. Not when bombs fell on my neighborhood. Not when my brother's death letter arrived. But I cried over bread. Bread given freely by the man I feared most. The soldier jumped around the counter, hands up as if approaching a wounded animal. "Ma'am, ma'am, did I scare you? Are you hurt?" His voice trembled slightly, as if he was the one afraid. I shook my head so hard my hair stuck to my wet cheeks. "No, no, no," was all I could manage. He crouched down, his massive frame folding gently, carefully until he was eye level with me. Not towering, not threatening, just there. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, softer now. "I didn't mean to." He gestured helplessly toward the fallen bread. "If I upset you, I'm real sorry." Sorry. He was sorry. The man I had been trained to fear, the man propaganda painted as a monster, was apologizing to me. The shame hit me harder than hunger ever had. I bent forward, palms pressed to my forehead, the world swimming through tears. Words spilled out without permission. "I'm so ashamed," I whispered. He froze. "Ma'am," I could barely speak. "You're supposed to hate us," I choked out. "You're supposed to hurt us. That's what—" my voice cracked. "That's what they told us." Something softened in his expression, the way sunlight softens the edge of a storm cloud. "Well," he said quietly, "they told us a whole lot of things too." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The truth hung between us, between his life and mine, between our countries, between the lies that shaped us both. He reached out, not to touch me, not to lift me, but to offer a clean cloth he'd pulled from his pocket. A small gesture, a respectful one. I stared at it, at him, at the bread still lying in the dust at my knees, and the last of my defenses crumbled. I covered my face with both hands and sobbed until my chest ached. I didn't know how long I stayed like that, long enough for the hall to resume its rhythm, for voices to rise again cautiously, for the world to keep moving even while mine collapsed. He didn't rush me, didn't touch me. He just knelt nearby, silent, steady, present, until my breathing slowed. When I finally looked up, he gave a single nod, simple, reassuring. "Take your time," he said. "Nobody's rushing you." Nobody's rushing you. No guard in Germany would have said that to a prisoner. No enemy soldier would have knelt beside a collapsed woman and handed her a cloth instead of a command. The weight of that realization hit me harder than the hunger of the transport ships, harder than the fear of capture, harder than any blow I'd taken in training. My breakdown wasn't from pain. It wasn't from fear. It was from kindness. Pure, uncalculated, undeserved. A kindness powerful enough to tear down 15 years of hatred in less than a minute. When I finally stood, legs trembling, I felt hollowed out, empty. But in that emptiness, something new had room to grow. A question, a dangerous, trembling question. If the people we feared most were capable of this, then what did that make us? It was the beginning of the end of everything I had believed, and the beginning of something else. Fragile, unfamiliar, terrifying. Trust. The strange thing about breaking is that once the pieces fall, you finally see the shape of what wounded you, and after that day in the mess hall, the clang of the fallen tray, the softness of an enemy's apology, something inside me stayed cracked open, wide enough for truth to slip in. I didn't trust that feeling at first. Truth is dangerous when you've spent your whole life being told what to fear. But over the next few days, the fear didn't return. Something else took its place. A quiet watching, a slow understanding, the beginning of a shift so small it frightened me more than the guards ever had. It started with the simplest moment. We were lining up for work behind the barracks, the air still cool from dawn. Dew clung to the grass like tiny pearls. A black soldier, one I hadn't seen before, walked past carrying a crate of tools. He wasn't looking at us, wasn't paying attention, just doing his morning duties. Yet suddenly, I found myself watching him not with fear, but with curiosity. His posture was straight, precise, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour. His expression steady, unbothered, focused, not a monster, not a savage, just a man, quiet, disciplined, tired in the way soldiers everywhere are tired. I caught myself staring. He didn't notice, and for the first time I didn't look away because I was scared. I looked away because I was ashamed that I'd ever believed the lies. Later that morning, we were sent to sort equipment in a storage shed. The Texas heat built slowly, like someone turning up a stove under the sky. Sweat clung to my neck. Dust stuck to my arms. My thoughts wandered, circling the same truth I kept trying to avoid. If they weren't the monsters, then who had lied to us, and why? The questions burned hotter than the sun. At midday, we were given a short break. A black soldier, slightly younger than Dwight with an easy stance and a faint scar over one eyebrow, walked by carrying a metal pitcher of water. Without thinking, I stepped forward. My heart thudded wildly, not from fear, from nerves. "Sir?" I asked, my voice a fragile thing. He stopped, turned. His eyes softened when he realized I was trying to speak English. "Yes, ma'am?" "Ma'am again, always ma'am." It hit me harder each time. I swallowed. I'm sorry, I said, the words heavy and halting. "For the other day, in the hall." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Just a flicker, but nothing mocking, nothing impatient. Instead, he shifted the pitcher to his other hand and gave a small, slow nod. "You don't owe me an apology," he said, "but I was." I hesitated. I was afraid. Of you. He didn't flinch, didn't look insulted, just breathed in, breathed out, like he'd heard those words before. "Ma'am," he said gently, "war lies to all of us." The sentence drifted through the thick heat and sat heavy in the air between us. War lies to all of us. I didn't know why, but the truth of it hit me so hard I stepped back as if pushed. He set the pitcher down long enough to adjust his cap. "I've seen men afraid of me before," he continued. "Not you personally, but soldiers, prisoners, even folks back home sometimes." Back home. The phrase echoed strangely, because back home was not a place where everyone knew kindness. He spoke the words quietly, with a tiredness I recognized, the tiredness of someone who has lived inside contradictions. "Our unit, 761st Tank Battalion. We trained hard," he said. "Fought harder." A faint smile warmed his face. "They called us the Black Panthers." I'd never heard of them, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "We fought for a country that didn't always fight for us," he said simply. "Still do." The words pulled something tight in my chest. These men, these guards, had carried burdens far heavier than mine, long before I ever feared them. Burden of racism. Burden of proving their worth. Burden of serving a nation that judged them by their skin before, their actions. Yet they chose kindness. Again and again. And suddenly, the balance of the world tilted. That night, lying in my bunk, I watched the shadows of the guards pass by the windows. Their silhouettes stretched across the walls, long, slow-moving shapes against the moonlit glow. Not threats, not nightmares, just men walking their rounds. One paused near the barracks door. He stood there a moment, adjusting his pack, rolling his shoulders to ease the weight. For the first time, I wondered, is he tired? Is he lonely? Is he treated fairly by his own officers? It was a strange, startling thought, seeing him not as danger, but as human. Germany had taught us that black men were incapable of decency. America showed me the opposite. But the cruelest irony wasn't how wrong Germany had been. It was how these men carried themselves, with dignity, patience, and grace, despite being treated as second-class citizens in their own land. A strength far greater than physical height. A moral strength, the kind you cannot teach, the kind propaganda cannot erase, the kind war cannot break. The next day, when Dwight returned to our work detail, I found myself approaching him before fear could catch up. He noticed me and paused, hands resting lightly on his hips. "You feeling better?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Because of you." He dipped his head in a modest nod. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "No," I said, shaking my head. "It was more." He waited, patient. "You were kind," I said. "You didn't have to be." He let out a long breath, something between a sigh and a quiet laugh. "A lot of folks think kindness is weakness," he said. "But where I come from, it's how you keep your humanity." The words settled into me like warm water. Kindness is how you keep your humanity. It felt like an entire world opening inside my ribcage. For the next few weeks, I saw the camp differently. The guards' steady footfalls no longer made my pulse jump. Their presence no longer tightened my throat. I noticed the way they shielded their eyes from the sun, the way they leaned on fence posts when they thought no one was watching, the way they greeted each other quietly, some with tired smiles, some with weary nods. Men living in a system that did not treat them equally, yet choosing to treat us as equals. The moral weight of that sank deep. America's strength was not just steel and factories. It wasn't just abundance or victory. It was the character of men like Dwight, men who carried a double burden and still chose dignity, men who fought hatred without becoming hateful, men who showed an enemy what humanity looked like. One afternoon, as we were being dismissed from work, I finally said the words that had been growing inside me. "I was wrong about you." Dwight glanced over, brow raised. "About all of you," I corrected. I believed lies." He gave a quiet nod, not triumphant, not smug, just understanding. "Happens to all of us," he said. "Wars are built out of lies. Good thing is, truth has a way of catching up." I looked at him, really looked at him. Not as a guard, not as an enemy, as a man, a good one. "Thank you," I whispered. He tipped his cap lightly. "Ma'am." "You're welcome." That night, as the sky turned the color of fire over the Texas plain, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not forgiveness, but clarity. The enemy I feared had offered me water, steadied my steps, knelt when I needed help, and spoke truth where my own leaders had spoken lies. And in that realization, I understood. Kindness wasn't weakness. Kindness was strength, the kind that wins wars without firing a shot. It was the moment I stopped seeing Black American soldiers as shadows in the dark, and started seeing them as the men who restored my faith in humanity. The strangest part wasn't that I trusted them now, it was that I missed them when they weren't around. A few months earlier, the sight of a Black American soldier would have made my stomach clench. Now, when Dwight or the others shifted to a different assignment, the workday felt heavier, quieter, emptied of something I didn't have a name for. Maybe safety, maybe familiarity, maybe the strange comfort of being seen, not as an enemy, but as a human being. Whatever it was, it settled into me slowly, like the way Texas heat settles into your skin. Quiet, patient, impossible to ignore. Those months passed in a rhythm I never expected to grow fond of. Morning roll call, work in the fields or sheds, lunch under the shade of the old pecan tree. Evening walks back to the barracks under a sky the size of an ocean. But what defined those months wasn't the work, it was the conversations. Tiny, accidental, transformative conversations that stitched themselves into the fabric of my memory. The first came on a windy afternoon when Dwight handed me a bucket and said, "You ever been to Alabama, ma'am?" I blinked at him confused. "No," I said, smiling. "I've barely been outside Hamburg." He laughed, not loudly, not mockingly, but with a softness that made the air round us feel lighter. "Well, ma'am, Alabama's hot like this, maybe hotter," he said, "but the trees, they're tall and green, and the air smells like pine after it rains." He paused, adjusting his grip on the bucket. "Not so dusty like Texas. My mama still lives there. She grows collard greens behind the house and yells at me if I don't write her enough." A soldier talking about his mother. The simplicity of it struck me like a blow. Men, we were told, were primitive, spoke about home with tenderness. Homesick tenderness. The kind that gnaws at you until you admit it. That day, I told him about Hamburg, about my mother's sewing shop near the Elbe, about the bells of St. Michael's Church and the way fog rolled in from the river at dawn, about the bakery on the corner that smelled of warm rye and fruit preserves. We talked until the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the yard. It was the first time I felt like myself again. The conversations became routine after that. One guard told us about Chicago, about the roar of elevated trains and the smell of roasted peanuts outside ballparks. Another described Louisiana with a smile so wide you could feel the humidity in his voice. Jazz drifting from open windows, gumbo simmering on stoves, the Mississippi rolling like a lazy giant through the city. In return, we told them about Germany. Not the Nazi speeches, not the propaganda. Real Germany, the one with forests that glowed gold in autumn, markets crowded with vendors selling bread and flowers, children sledding down snowy hills, grandmothers slapping flour from their hands as they baked Sunday cakes. Sometimes the guards would listen with their arms folded, nodding, considering our words like puzzle pieces they hadn't seen before. Sometimes they'd laugh, sometimes they'd shake their heads, sometimes they'd say quietly, "Sounds nice," and each time, the distance between us shrank. I learned more English in those months than in all my schooling in Germany. Not classroom English, not stiff, formal sentences, real English. "Y'all," Dwight taught me one day, grinning when I tried it. "No, ma'am, you gotta let it slide. Yeah." Long, like honey. "Honey," another guard said. "She's German. She ain't ever said anything long in her life." I rolled my eyes at him. He winked. It was the friendliest insult I'd received in years. We taught them German words in return. "Kartoffel," Sophie said one afternoon, pointing at a potato in the camp kitchen. "Kartoffel," the guard repeated, proud of himself. "Close," I said, laughing. "Very close." By the end of the month, I heard guards greeting us with awkward but sincere attempts. "Guten Morgen, ladies. We start Arbeit now, ja? No trouble today, alles gut?" Every time I felt that familiar warmth spreading behind my ribs. In the evenings when our chores were done, we sometimes heard music drifting from the guard stations, deep, soulful notes spilling over the yard like water. The first time it happened, I froze. "What is that?" I whispered. Dwight smiled faintly. "That's the blues, ma'am. The blues. Music born from pain," he said. Music from men who lived between worlds. Music that rose from hardship and turned into strength. He explained where it came from. Cotton fields, railroad tracks, backbreaking labor under the southern sun. He said his grandfather taught him songs older than the war, older than America itself. When he spoke of it, his voice carried a reverence I had only ever heard in churches. Sometimes, if we worked late near the fence line, he'd hum while stacking tools, low, steady notes weaving through the dusk. We never sang with him. We didn't know the words. But sometimes when the sky turned purple and locusts buzzed overhead, we hummed along with the melody. Our songs mixed with theirs. Our stories mixed with theirs. Our lives mixed more gently than any of us expected. There were cultural exchanges, too. Small ones, unspoken agreements that no one in command ever acknowledged. One guard, Private Harris from Chicago, told us jokes so terrible we laughed out of politeness. "What's the difference between a chicken and a German radio operator?" he'd ask. We'd groan before he even reached the punchline. Chicken stops clucking when it's fried. We responded with German jokes, most of which he didn't understand, but he laughed anyway. Sometimes the guards shared scraps of their lunches, tiny things they shouldn't have. A piece of peach cobbler, a bite of cornbread, a sip of Coca-Cola so sweet it made my teeth ache. In return, we taught them old lullabies and folk songs. I remember Dwight listening intently as Greta sang Die Gedankens and Frei. Thoughts are free. His eyes softened. "That's a good one," he said. "We got a song like that, too." He hummed the melody of We Shall Overcome, a promise more than a song. I didn't know then how important that melody would become decades later, but standing there under the warm Texas sky, I felt something shift between us. A recognition, two people. But what he had really given me was proof of something larger. Humanity in the middle of war. I placed that photograph on my bedside table the first night I returned home, and it stayed there for the next 50 years. Time moved. I married. I had children. Life rebuilt itself carefully around the broken parts. My children grew up hearing stories of Hamburg, of hunger, of bombed-out streets. But I always ended with Huntsville, with the guards, with the kindness that rewrote my life. When my eldest daughter was 7, she pointed at the photograph and asked, "Mama, who is that man helping you?" I told her his name was Dwight, that he was from Alabama, that he was a soldier, that he saved me, not from bullets, but from hatred. Her eyes widened. "But he was the enemy?" "No," I said quietly. "The war said he was the enemy, but he was a good man." She never forgot those words. Years later, my grandchildren heard the story too. Their world was modern. Televisions, airplanes, news broadcasts, a fast, loud America they only knew from pictures. But when they learned that an American soldier treated their grandmother with dignity when she had nothing, they listened with reverence. One autumn afternoon in 1986, my grandson, 10 years old, serious beyond his age, asked, "Oma, do you think he's still alive?" Something in me trembled. Dwight would have been an old man by then. I didn't know, but I told him the truth. "I hope so." 2 weeks later, my daughter handed me an envelope. "Mama," she said softly, "the children wrote a letter." "To whom?" I asked. "To America," she replied. "To him." My hand shook when I unfolded the pages. They had written to the Alabama State Records Office, the U.S. Army Archives, even the Huntsville City Council. Childlike handwriting, but heartfelt words. Our grandmother was a prisoner of war. A black American soldier was kind to her. If he's alive, we want to say thank you. I cried that night, quietly, for a long time. It took months, but a letter finally came back. Sergeant Dwight Carter, 761st Tank Battalion, U.S. Army, retired. Living in Mobile, Alabama. My breath left me in a rush. My daughter said, "Mama, do you want to write to him?" I didn't answer at first. Instead, I went to my bedside table, picked up the photograph, and held it against my heart. "Yes," I whispered, "yes, I do." I wrote him a letter with careful English, hands trembling over every word. "You may not remember me, but I have remembered you all my life. Your kindness saved more than my body. It saved the part of me that believed in good men." I did not expect a reply, but he wrote back. His handwriting was bold and firm, the kind of writing done by someone who never rushed his words. "Of course, I remember. You were scared. We all were. But you tried, and that mattered. If you ever come to America again, you have a place at my table." My daughter read the letter aloud while tears filled my eyes. In 1990, we traveled to Mobile. I was old by then, my hair silver, my steps slow, but when I saw Dwight waiting on his porch, tall even in age, shoulders a little stooped but eyes just as gentle, I felt time collapse around me. He smiled, wide and warm. "Well," he said, "look at us now." I stepped forward, reached out, held his hand. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." He squeezed back. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you lived your life. That's thanks enough." We talked for hours. About Alabama, about Hamburg, about the war, about mercy. Our families laughed together in the kitchen, swapping stories, swapping memories, swapping a history that should have divided us but somehow bound us instead. Two families, once separated by nations, race, war, sharing cornbread and coffee at the same table. America as it could be, but the fear vanished. I no longer flinched when a guard approached. I no longer avoided their eyes. I no longer felt my chest tighten at the sound of their footsteps. Instead, I felt anchored. These men had become the steady shape of my days, our teachers, our protectors, our link to a world larger than war. And they carried their burdens with a quiet heroism I couldn't name at the time. Now I know the name. Greatest Generation. Men who could have treated us with hatred but didn't. Men who fought for a country that didn't fully fight for them. Men who stood taller than the prejudice surrounding them. Taller than the heat. Taller than the war itself. Men who lived their values instead of shouting them. They were living proof of a powerful truth. Strength is not the ability to dominate. Strength is the ability to show mercy. Meanwhile, America surged like a rising tide around us. We saw it in the trucks rolling through camp, hauling materials, hauling grain, hauling fuel. We saw it in the planes overhead, so many, so fast, their engines roaring like proof of endless factories. We heard rumors from guards. 96,000 planes this year. 8 million tons of shipping. Factories running day and night. Women building bombers faster than the men can fly them. To us, America felt infinite. Food everywhere, music everywhere, electricity everywhere, confidence everywhere. Where Germany struggled to feed its soldiers, America fed its prisoners. Where Germany collapsed under bombs, America built ships faster than anyone could count. Where Germany narrowed its world to hatred and obedience, America, despite its flaws, expanded its world with compassion. One evening, as we were walking back to the barracks, I asked Dwight a question that had been growing inside me for weeks. "Why are you kind to us?" He thought for a long moment. Then he said, "Because hate never made anyone strong, but mercy?" He looked at the sunset, deep gold spilling across the field. Mercy builds nations. I didn't know what to say. Not then, but his words stayed with me. Through the summer, through the fall, through every moment of quiet between chores and mealtimes. I thought of Germany's hunger, America's abundance, Germany's destruction, America's production, Germany's hatred, America's humanity. And the longer I lived inside that contrast, the clearer it became. The war wasn't teaching me who was stronger. It was teaching me who was good. And goodness, steady, unforced, quietly present, was more powerful than any army I had ever seen. It changed me. It changed everything. I used to think the war would follow me forever. I never expected its gentlest moment to be the one that stayed with me the longest. Years passed before I understood that the real story of Camp Huntsville did not end at the gates. It followed me across an ocean, across decades, across generations, quietly, faithfully, like a shadow stitched to my life. And it began with a single photograph. When the war finally ended, the world felt both enormous and unbearably small. Germany was rubble, cities unrecognizable, streets cracked open like wounds. I returned to Hamburg, walking past twisted steel and charred brick that used to be neighborhoods. People spoke in half whispers, half ghosts, half humans. But I carried something intact inside me. Something hard-won and fragile. The memory of men who could have hated me, but didn't. In my suitcase, wrapped in a spare shirt, was the photograph the camp chaplain had taken during one of our work breaks. I hadn't known he snapped it until the day we were processed for repatriation. It showed me, thinner then, dirt on my cheek, hair tucked behind my ears, sitting on a crate while a black American soldier knelt to pour water from his canteen into my cupped hands. That soldier was Dwight. The chaplain had said, "Thought you might want to remember you made it through." But what he had really given me was proof of something larger. Humanity in the middle of war. I played as I remembered it, America as I hoped it would always be. When I left, Dwight pressed the old photograph back into my hands. "You keep it," he said. "It belonged to you first." I looked at the image. The young soldier kneeling, the young woman trembling, water glistening between them. A moment of grace in a brutal world. Before I stepped off his porch, I turned back and told him the sentence that had lived inside me for half a century. "America defeated my army," I said, "but its kindness defeated my hatred." His eyes shone. He nodded once, firmly. "That's the victory that matters," he said. "I am an old woman now. The war is far behind me. My children have children. Germany is rebuilt. The world has changed enough times to make my memories feel like relics. But the photograph still sits on my table. Black and white, edges worn soft with time, a soldier kneeling, a girl receiving water, a kindness unexpected and unforgettable. I keep it there to remind myself, and anyone who asks, that history is not only battles and leaders and flags. Sometimes history is one man choosing compassion when he had every reason not to. Sometimes that is enough to change a life.